Hi, it's me again. In my last video, I talked about concept illustration and concept design. It's sort of a smaller form factor, working on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. In a lot of ways, those sketches were more vignettes or more studies in pieces of architecture and not necessarily larger environments. So I wanted to do another pass where I talked about slightly bigger concepts, and these are often 11 by 17 because it's easy to grab. Sometimes they get larger still. And often they try to depict environments above and beyond just little pieces like the smaller vignettes. So when I was starting working in theme parks, I got a reputation of being called Mr. Birdseye because I would often default to doing a drawing that showed an aerial view of a concept because I felt in many ways it did a better job of communicating the overall project by being able to look at it in its entirety, like looking at a dollhouse or looking at a map. So here's a whole variety of larger format sketches I've done over the years. Some of these are really quite old, and or from sort of forgotten projects. Some are from more recent, but a lot of them have something in common. Usually it's that the idea was bigger than it would fit on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So these early sketches are bird's eye sketches for just concepts, for ideas for lands, as opposed to necessarily diving into the details of a project we were going with. So doing a variety of different opportunities for different ways themed land could be laid out was done in here. And early on, I would often either there would be a conceptual layout or I would do a rough layout and then I would use sort of drafting skills to extrude out the buildings from those initial rough layouts. And to nowadays, I will often build a really rudimentary 3D model, find a nice camera angle, take a snapshot, and then let that be the foundation. But early on, I would just extrude these out of the plan views. Here's some more vignetted sketch, but larger ideas for themed houses for a project. And again, like the other concepts, it's the red color erase pencil with ink on top, and then when it was scanned, the red is removed. So in this case, there was just too much detail in it to fit into a smaller sheet of paper, so I did these larger images and quickly doing a large variety of ways in which we could treat these various sort of cartoon themed houses that we were working on. Same thing for larger things like the exterior of an entire attraction or some kind of iconic piece of architecture that explains the bigger concept than just a small vignette. And also little pieces of interiors, like this part of this restaurant interior concept, or the exterior of a venue. Working larger means more potential detail in the sketch, and being able to sort of explore what's happening architecturally and how the theming is applied to that. Some more examples of sort of bird's eye sketches. Same thing is there was a plan view, and then it was sort of turned at an angle, and then I just used a vertical ruler to pop up the buildings from that. Back in junior high, I took a couple drafting classes. Back then, drafting was on vellum, and you used actual pencils and T-squares and triangles, and you figured out how to break things down into what we would call CAD today, but these draft drawings. And I just loved it. And I especially loved these sort of orthographic versions of drawings where you could actually measure from them, because rather than them having perspective in it, you can see that the lines are all equal within each other. Another wonderful way of taking something that's potentially complex and could conceivably be difficult to communicate in small vignettes. This one drawing does a better job of talking about the flow of the queue and where the props live. And then later on, other sketches can be done to help describe what the theming is of each of those. More of the same. theming. In this case, it was a rudimentary 3D model that then I drew over the top of. But this is the fun part. It's one thing to build the shape of what you're designing, and then the fun part is to start layering story and detail on top of the sketch. Same here for a way to treat the entry graphics for an attraction. Or in this case, it was coming up with a themed fountain design that did not end up getting built, but being able to play with this idea of verticality, and it would have been really hard to squeeze this into a smaller piece of paper. Also playing with whole attractions, like a teacup style ride. How do you do one drawing that describes how all the pieces work together, and the larger format helps you do that. Here's an example of a concept plan. This is to help me as well as the team figure out how all the pieces work together and how you would move through a space. And then sort of cut out pieces of what that attraction details might look like on a larger sheet of paper, so it gives me more space to put in details. More bird's eyes. Sometimes a lot of these things come as the first concept, where you really don't know how everything's going to work together, and you could start doing vignettes, but if you could do an overview, then it's something you can talk to with the client and figure out how do these things relate to each other, and how should we proceed diving into the space and starting to do the design. Also, I've done a whole lot of maps for projects where we not only want to understand how the architecture works together, but how do you communicate that architecture and that environment to the audience that eventually is going to explore it. And in this case, this was describing how you would move through the space in sort of a fun map format. Another larger drawing, helping me be able to get in and make some more of the conceptual details of what the graphics might look like. I've been doing the Dickens Christmas Fair map for years now. Pretty much now I just make alterations to the existing map each year. This was an early, this is 2000. And when the Dickens Fair was smaller, using a smaller portion of the Cow Palace. And then the next year it grew, this is 2001, it grew and it included some more buildings so that we started to expand it. Now it actually takes up a much larger space. It's also great for communicating to a client. This was a friend whose lifelong dream was to open an ice cream parlor, and so they had purchased a store in Manhattan Beach. And as a friend, I had done some concept sketches that described not only how the exterior would work, but then elevations of the interior and how all the pieces might work within that space. Keeping a kind of a beach theme, but a fun sort of like it's always been there kind of feel. I didn't do the final graphics, but I did sort of indicate what might be within the space as far as scale and potential theming. Then even here's the front view of the same space. And here's another wall that included not only the booths, which had graphics on them, potential fun graphics on the walls, fictitious historical events, and then even a pints to go freezer in the back, and even down to the restroom elevations. And once again, all this comes from those wonderful years in junior high, taking a drafting class where you're trying to communicate an idea, but you're doing it to scale. So you know that that all these elements are going to fit together. What's great too is that nowadays with 3D, I could scan all these elevations and I could reconstruct the entire space in 3D so you could wander around in VR and see what the space would look like. So from 2000 to 2004, I worked for a company called There.com, and we were really starting out to try to figure out whether it would be possible to create an environment for people to virtually meet each other. It was sort of a massive multiplayer conversation world. It was a tropical island. And so I did a lot of having to design not only vignettes, but also places. So lots of drawings of bird's eyes of various villages and how they would work together and link together even down to this non-realized sort of modular Moroccan city that would give you a piece of Morocco, and then it would give you a piece of Victorian English town, and then you would get an Italian villa as ways to bring themes in beyond just the sort of Tahitian tropical island. Another elevation, and then lots and lots of bird's eye illustrations. Also, we knew that because of the technology's ability in the year 2000, 2001, that these buildings would have to be modular. And so villages would often be made out of repeating parts. So how would we use those parts in ways to make it feel like a place, despite the fact it was really being built out of a kit? And the bird's eye of a temple environment for there. A treehouse environment where you would climb up on walkways. We had doom buggies that we introduced that people could drive around virtually, but we found that as soon as we introduced the doom buggies, they would start to run over other people. So we started elevating our villages so they were up in the trees or up on stilts, so you could have a conversation without being run over by a doom buggy. More of the same. Each of the islands had their own identity and their own name. This was one that had an airship that sat above it out in the desert. Once again, you can see all the elevated platforms to keep you from being run over, and an overview of the entire island that pulled out the potential themed areas where those villages would be located. Also doing things like laying out the props for an interior cabana, what that might be like. What kind of props we'd have to build. Of course, all of this is in the computer and virtual. And the details pulling out from an elevation, those things that are important to keep in mind as we're constructing a space. Another cabana layout, here a more rectangular shape, and the props and things that we might end up making to populate that. Here's an upside down map view of one of the larger villages. We were also playing with this idea of having rentable spaces that you would be in sort of a neighborhood where you would own your own hut or cabana, and you'd have an address and people could visit you there. More bird's eyes. All of these you can see feel extruded up as opposed to in perspective, but they do the job of communicating the layout. It's another tropical environment. Here's another desert environment. So in 4 years, I did a lot of these sort of drawings to figure out how each of these various virtual towns might look, or villages. Another concept for one of the lands that had, we had sort of a paintball mechanic where you could, originally the idea was you would have a gun that could shoot fruit, and you'd go to fruit sellers and pick up fruit, and then you could fire at each other. And then there was this temple that was a monkey-themed temple that you could play basically laser tag with fruit. Here's another version of that. And this helps not only the team understand what your intention is, it helps you understand what your intention is, because as you're sort of laying out this treasure map of environments, you're figuring it out for yourself as well. Even more, boy, there was a lot of villages on this project. And here's some more concept things that for various attractions. In this case, it was a Hunger Game themed train restaurant was the idea. Sometimes these projects will last a day, it's just let's explore something, may never ever get into a finished presentation. It's just so that you can talk to the team about its possibilities. Here's a ticketing and reservations desk idea. Some more older Pumpkin Town concepts with lots more detail that the larger format makes it easier to do. Here's another Pumpkin Town Fair idea. This one was with a model that was built, and then I drew over the top of it. This was for a Mystic Marketplace fair that I did a map for. This is not exactly what it looked like, but it absolutely was the layout for the booths. And something like this not only is meant to communicate where these things might be within the layout of the fair, but it also acts like an aspirational idea of what the people putting the fair on would like the event to look like. So although many of these booths are probably even roofless, or they're sort of Costco purchased craft tents, um, showing that variety could add theming and diversity to the experience can be done in the map as much as it can be done um, as vignette sketches. It's another slice of an attraction that never happened, but describing how the vehicle might move through the various scenes in a circuitous sort of serpentine layout. Here's a very rough, I think this was even done during a meeting with a fatter marker, a big sort of Mowgli stage concept that he would move through, and then various characters would appear in these mini stages. Ideas for attractions, in this case, a swinging Viking boat, or a themed off-the-shelf water play structure that then we would apply a theme to the top of. Here's a vignette that had a lot more information in it than I could squeeze into a smaller drawing, so I went with a larger one. Very strange sort of animated prop that suggested how Mr. Ping might create fortune cookies. Another plan. I do a lot of plans. Not a lot of them are seen here, but they really help myself and the client understand how all these things potentially could work together. Or various details that talk about breaking down how graphics are used, and this starts the conversation with the graphics team who will be responsible for coming up with graphics. And here's some stuff for Walkabout, the Wonderland initial concept we didn't go with, but trying to figure out how to squeeze all the various chapters and characters from Alice in Wonderland into one layout, and some vignette sketches of potential environments that we ended up building for Walkabout. And like I said, a lot of this is as much to help me understand what the theme is as it is for the team to understand how all these pieces will work together. In this case, I ended up building all these buildings, so it was really a way for me to figure out how this little village was going to be constructed before I actually constructed it. And then finally, here's a sketch I did for the Tokyo course. This is the back alleys of Tokyo. And once again, I can do a lot of thinking in this format before I start building things. And this is sort of a combination of sketching, but also constantly referencing research for windows and rooftops and telephone wires and graphics and lighting to help inform the finished product. So anyway, so that's larger format sketches. I hope this was interesting. And there's no rule as to when you use a different size. For me, it's just some things feel like more information needs to be included in the drawings, so the drawings start to get bigger. And when it's a full-on bird's eye that's used for an entire land or even an attraction, I'll get even bigger still. Sometimes 24 by 30 is about the size. I try to stick with something that can easily fit in my flatbed scanner, maybe with 2 passes at the most. These will fit in it with just 1 pass. So that's it. Large scale concept drawings are just as fun as the small ones, but they do tend to have more information and can sometimes be more valuable than just the little sketches that are done to help the smaller details get realized. So thanks for following along.